You know how you sometimes skip to the end of a long email just to see who it's from and the final sign-offs? Well, what if those simple greetings weren't just an ending, but were actually a hidden map, a kind of blueprint for a huge, complex, and incredibly effective network? Today, we're going to look at the final verses of an ancient letter from the Apostle Paul, not as just a simple closing, but really as a window into a fascinating story of connection, strategy, and deep purpose. 13,400. That's the estimated number of miles the Apostle Paul traveled to build this very network. And what's just staggering is that a huge chunk of that was on foot. This one number really grounds us in the kind of dedication and just sheer physical effort it took to connect all these people and communities in a shared mission. It was literally a network built one step at a time. So let's dive into how he did it. All right, so here's our learning route for this explainer. First, we'll explore the structure of Paul's great network. Then we'll get into the brilliant strategy he used to spread the message. After that, we'll meet the diverse team that made it all possible, understand the ultimate goal that was driving them, and we'll wrap up with a really powerful, urgent choice that the lesson puts before us. Okay, so let's start with the network itself. Now, even when Paul was physically stuck, he was writing this letter from prison, remember, he was never really cut off. He was acting as the central hub, a master strategist, constantly linking people and local communities. His life's work was really about weaving all these different individuals and groups into a single, stronger, more resilient fabric. And this is what's so key. The core idea behind his whole operation wasn't about one superstar traveling around. The lesson points out that Paul understood a fundamental truth. For the mission to actually succeed and grow, collaboration wasn't just, a nice bonus. It was absolutely essential. Everybody had a critical part to play. So we've talked about the what. Now let's get into the how. If the network was the structure, what was the operating system that made the whole thing run so well? Well, Paul used a really efficient, repeatable strategy to spread his message across one of the most powerful empires the world has ever seen. And you can see here just how methodical his approach was. First, he'd target major cities, big centers of trade and influence. Then, once he was there, he wouldn't just preach. He would identify and train promising local leaders. And these newly empowered people could then take the message to all the smaller towns and regions he could never visit himself. And the glue holding it all together? A constant stream of letters and trusted messengers, keeping everyone connected. And this communication wasn't just random. It followed a clear system. Paul would send out his trusted representatives, his emissaries. They would deliver news and encouragement face-to-face, which was way more personal and detailed than a letter could be. Of course, they'd also carry his written letters. But it was a two-way street. These emissaries also had the job of gathering reports on how the communities were doing and bringing that vital news back to Paul. So this role of the emissary was just crucial. I mean, these weren't just couriers. They were deeply trusted people sent on really important missions. Take Tychicus, for example. He's described as a faithful minister and a fellow servant. His job wasn't just to drop off a scroll. It was to bring comfort, to check in on people, and to strengthen those personal bonds that held the entire network together. It was all about trust. Of course, any strategy is only as good as the people making it happen. So let's shift our focus now from the blueprint to the builders themselves, the really dynamic and diverse team that powered this entire network. This gives us such a great snapshot of the team right there with Paul in Rome. You can see the diversity immediately. You've got Jewish believers like Aristarchus, Mark and Justus, working right alongside Gentiles like Epaphras, Luke and Demas. And just look at those personal notes from Paul. My fellow prisoner, a comfort, the beloved physician. These are not just names on a list. They are deeply loved and valued partners. And this unity is a major point in the lesson. Paul goes out of his way to mention that his Jewish co-workers were of the circumcision, and then he lists his Gentile partners separately. Now, why do that? To show that even with the very real cultural and religious tensions that were going on in the early church, this team, they figured out how to work together in harmony for a bigger purpose. Their shared mission was more important than their differences. This network was also a place of, restoration. The story of John Mark is such a powerful example of this. The lesson reminds us that years before, he had actually deserted Paul on a mission trip, which was a huge deal. But here he is, years later, not only back at Paul's side, but being described as a source of comfort to him. It's a really beautiful picture of forgiveness and what second chances can look like. So, we've seen the network's structure, we've met the people who powered it, but that brings us to the biggest question of all. Why? I mean, what was the whole point of all this travel, all this communication, all this hard work? What was the ultimate purpose that drove Paul and his entire team?
The goal, according to the lesson, had 3 parts. The first part was for believers to stand. And this isn't a passive thing. It means to stand firm, to be unmovable, grounded and steadfast in their faith. In a world that was full of competing philosophies and spiritual opposition, this kind of stability and resilience was a top priority.
The second goal was for them to be perfect. Now, this doesn't mean being flawless or never making a mistake. The lesson is clear that this is about a perfection of character, a kind of spiritual maturity. It's the ongoing journey of developing a character that's defined by sacrificial love for other people, all while knowing that you never fully arrive. And the final piece of the goal was to be complete. This is all about conviction. It means being fully convinced, fully persuaded, with no doubt that God was going to fulfill his promises. And it was this deep-seated confidence that gave them the power to share their message fully, holding nothing back. And that brings us to our final section, where the lesson kind of shifts gears from explanation to application. It shows us the incredibly high stakes of all this by contrasting 2 members of Paul's own team, and it forces us to think about a final and very urgent choice. This lays it out perfectly. 2 different paths. On one side, you've got Luke, the beloved physician. He stayed loyal, stood by Paul through everything, imprisonment, hardship, right to the very end. But then you have Demas. He was also a fellow worker, but in the end, Paul sadly writes that Demas has forsaken me, having loved this present world. It's just a stark, sobering contrast between 2 completely different allegiances. And here's the kicker. As the lesson puts it, this isn't a choice any of us can avoid. We are inevitably under the influence of one of these 2 great powers. And here's the thing. Coming under the influence of darkness doesn't require some big, dramatic choice to serve it. All it takes is to simply neglect to ally ourselves with the kingdom of light. Inaction, in this case, is a decision. And so this explainer leaves us with a really direct and deeply personal question. It's not about big, grand gestures, but about the small, everyday choices we're all making. So looking at your own life, your own priorities, your own network of connections, what choices are you making that reveal who or what truly has your heart?